We're live.
Howdy, boys.
Howdy there.
We got Mr. Kyle Ruth in the building today.
Yeah, and he just finished age group semifinals.
I did.
That's right.
I'm tired, boss.
I'm tired, boss.
After submission window 1, you were what, 51st?
51 after submission 1.
They take 40, so we'll see how he does.
I think you did pretty good.
I feel like these last two scores
Yeah.
are pretty solid, but we'll
If
see.
you're watching this episode, we previously did one on strength and one on skills. And in those, basically our whole point is, hey, a lot of us are entering the off season right now. What are the things we need to work on? We had 3 different buckets: strength, skills, and then endurance, which is what we're going to be talking about today. I know that after quarterfinals, a lot of people said, man, it was my endurance that they felt was holding them back. When it comes to this topic of endurance, what is the one thing most people get wrong about when they start to dive in to try to fix that?
Well, why are you asking me? You brought the strength guy on the endurance podcast? No, I'm kidding.
You've put a lot of thought into endurance. I want you to answer the question, but let me reframe it just real quick, because you're so right. We had so many questions, especially after quarterfinal workout number 1. So for the quick refresher for those that maybe didn't do it or don't remember going through the pain, 3, 2, 1, go. It was intervals where you started with snatches and then you rode, and then it was box step ups. You get a 1 minute rest and you repeat that for 4 times. So basically 3 minutes on, 1 minute off times 4. And people did that, and by round 2 or 3, they're like, I have no capacity left. I can't put any effort into the snatches or the rowing or even the step ups. And so then automatically they thought, including people that are close to us, I don't have enough engine, is what people would say, or enough endurance. And so why, or what mistake maybe would they make just based on that workout, as far as them assuming it must just be capacity or engine?
Well, I think for a lot of people in that workout specifically, it was probably a pacing issue, right? And pacing and endurance and building endurance are they are so intertwined that, you can't have good endurance if you don't have good pacing strategies and good pacing structures. If you go out in a workout like that and, you used a whole minute to do snatches, and then, that took away from your transition time into the row. So there's bad strategy. And then after 2 rounds, maybe you were rowing, if you're a male, 1,500 calories per hour for the first round, and then 1,400, and then 1,200, and then 1,000 on the last round, because you just went out too hot. And that's a pacing problem as much as it is building an endurance problem. But you also would need to build your engine to be able to support the ability to go at, 1,500, 1,400, 1,400, 1,300 calories per hour on the rower in a workout like that. So that they're, the two are definitely linked.
Yeah. And I think another thing, and probably one of the reasons why I asked the question, is I watched people's videos when they said that it was an endurance issue, but then they really had to ramp themselves up just to do the snatch. 135 or 95 became heavy for them. So it may be an endurance issue, but also if 135 is 75 or 80% of your max in that workout, it's still a strength issue. You need to drive up your 1RM power snatch so that feels easier for you. So for example, watching Travis do that workout, or even watching you do that workout, that's 50% of your max snatch as opposed to it being 80%. And so it's going to be inherently easier for you to be able to do that snatch than someone that's maybe a little bit weaker. And then the same thing's true in the box step ups. Those 50-pound dumbbells, or maybe the 35-pound dumbbells for a lady, even for guys at 20 inches, could get heavy if you can't do single leg work, or you're not doing any heavy lunge work or heavy front squat or back squat work. And that becomes a strength limitation too, even though it feels like an endurance limitation.
I think to that point as well, one of the things that a lot of people got limited by their heart rate was really high from doing snatches and rowing. And then they have to hold on to dumbbells, and their grip
so hard.
I've talked to clients about this so much, that you can't just build your grip in isolation. You have to build your grip with a high heart rate in the same kind of physiological environment that you're going to experience in a Metcon. And what I mean by that is, if you're coming off the row and your body is pouring lactate and hydrogen ions and all that stuff into the blood, and your heart rate is 170 or 180, it's 95% of your heart rate max. There just isn't as much blood and oxygen available to the grip. And if you don't train that, then you're not going to have endurance in that environment when that shows up. And it's guaranteed to show up in CrossFit,
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you're guaranteed to see high heart rate plus grip stuff show up.
Not to mention just even moving while you're doing the grip stuff. A lot of people will maybe hold like pinch plates and just like a easy carry when you're breathing normally, or doing farmer's handle carries, or doing dumbbell carries. But now with high heart rate and going on and off the box where the dumbbells are moving in and out of your hand, that also adds a more pressure to the grip.
I know it's not a grip endurance podcast, but to your point, if you're trying to train for holding dumbbells or holding barbells or holding a bar, that's a different kind of grip and uses a different set of muscles than doing pinch style grip. And so you got to make sure that you're training as specific for the sport demands as you possibly can. So, using things like farmer's carries would be decent, but doing things like dumbbell farmer's carries, if you're trying to improve your grip on the dumbbell, or, barbell cycling, or, long sets of toes to bar to improve each of those things individually, you might get a little bit out of the pinch plate stuff that transfers over to that, but that's a crush grip, which might help your rope climbs more because you're using a crush grip versus, right? So just keep in mind that you need to be as specific as you can.
I think this example perfectly illuminated the problem many people are running into, is that they come out into their off season, and just right there in that conversation, it's like, well, what the hell do I need to focus on? So who are the people who actually, if a lot of people think it's their endurance or their breathing, most of them will say, how do we know that they should be in that bucket? Again, we have the episodes for the other two. Maybe quickly single out who really should, even if you have a caveat saying, well, everybody could use some endurance.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, if you're at the upper end of the strength spectrum for the sport, then most of your time should probably be spent on endurance, assuming you have all of the requisite skills.
Yeah, I think that is you. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That means you can handle the loads that often come out in CrossFit.
So
what else?
Kyle, you can power snatch 265 pounds, squat snatch 285 pounds, your back squat 287 pounds. Your back squat is well over 400. Your front squat's well over, probably close to 400 pounds. Like, you have all those numbers, right? Your squat clean super high. You can do ring muscle ups, handstand walk, toe to bar, chest to bar. Any skill that comes out. So
30 unbroken Dave Matthews concerts.
Yes.
I'm getting close. I think I'm at 19.
But all of those things you have, including Dave Matthews, the one thing that you wouldn't want to work on then would be endurance. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's why you bring the strength guy on to talk about endurance, because it's the thing I'm constantly chasing. But yeah, I think that's your primary person who needs to build endurance. And I know a lot of people would be like, well, there's not very many people who are at that end of the strength spectrum, but that's not true. People who come out of strength and power sports, come out of football or whatnot, that's a common type of person, or, they have years of powerlifting experience, or they have years of bodybuilding experience, and they transition into CrossFit. Those people tend to be really strong, and maybe they have some mobility limitations, but once they address that and the skill components, they're left with needing to build endurance and build an engine to be competitive.
Yeah.
I'm not sure which problem is better to have, right? Like, strength takes a really long time to build, but endurance is something that you have to do all the time, constantly. Like, you have to train it on a regular basis to maintain it and to improve it. And it does improve, right? If you're consistently training, ergs and doing, some of the lower barrier to entry CrossFit stuff. When I say that, I think about like basic conditioning things, box jumps, wall ball, double unders, burpees, burpee box jump overs, those type of movements. If you train those consistently, they'll get better. Right. But as soon as you stop training them, if you are one of these, a me type strength and power athlete, then they deteriorate so fast. I can take all this time off of strength work and
you keep it.
I'll still snatch, I'll still power snatch close to 265 and snatch close to 287. But if I take 2 weeks off of running and burpees and double unders, man, you can feel it. I can't move. Like, I can barely breathe and stuff. So.
And I would say, just like for the audience, kind of give like these different avatars, I would be not necessarily the opposite, because I'm still pretty powerful, but as far as strength goes, I would want, if I'm competing in the sport, I would want to get stronger right now, right? Like, my back squat has gone down, my clean has gone down, my snatch has gone down. So if I'm looking at the off season, I'm the person, when we did that strength podcast, I want to get stronger right now, and I'm going to focus a little bit more on endurance later on in the season. So if you do have the strength, if you have all those skills, and you're like, I didn't do that well in event number 1 of quarterfinals, or number
event
2.
Yeah, I think so. You've been harping on event 1. I think event 2 in quarterfinals was the one that was truly the endurance test.
Wall ball burpee?
Yes, the wall ball burpee, with it being number 1, a longer time domain. There was no rest built in, with it not being an interval workout versus number 1. And number 1, people could be strength limited on the snatches or the dumbbell box step ups. But for people that are strong, those movements were cake.
Yeah.
And that workout wasn't that hard. You know, as a larger athlete, you get good momentum on the rower. I'm taller, so the step-ups were easy. You know, my grip strength is plenty strong to handle 50-pound dumbbells for the entire workout. But workout 2 was an endurance nightmare.
20 minutes of like continuously moving.
Yes, yeah. And the pace, I thought that I was going to be able to maintain much faster paces than I was, and wasn't even close. And that's such a good example. Like, I didn't do a lot of the burpee progressions this year that I've done in the past. And man, I got exposed so hard on that workout.
So let's go back to Chris's question, because I kind of reframed it, because I just wanted people to understand that there are some people that may think they have an endurance limitation, and you very well may, but you probably should still start in strength. So that's just kind of my caveat of like, make sure that you're getting stronger in the off season if that's you. But let's talk about the endurance athlete. What are the mistakes, Kyle, that the athlete that needs to build endurance make in the off season?
I think the biggest one, and this is a huge misconception in the training market, is that if you do lots of echo bike and running and rowing and all these things, that's automatically going to equate to improved Metcon endurance performance.
Yeah.
And I have repeatedly learned the lesson for 14 years now.
Same.
that you can't just do erg work and running and we call it cyclical or monostructural endurance work, and expect that to one-to-one improve your Metcons.
Yeah.
Right?
Like, now there's some carryover, and you need to be doing those.
You have to have the base of this endurance work to be able to raise your endurance ceiling, especially as a more powerful athlete. Like, you have to do that, but it's not the thing that's going to result in endurance improvement.
Do you feel like a lot of people do that? That's what they go to?
100%. They're like, I lack an engine, so they do an echo progression, or I don't have an engine, so they do only rowing. Like, I've done that many times where I'm like, man, if I could just row better in Metcons, I would be, more competitive.
So then just to give an example, you do a rowing progression, but you're not doing any like true metabolic conditioning, CrossFit conditioning
Meaning
work
you're not
in the
mixing
off-season.
the row with burpees.
Yeah, it's not. I'm not doing a row wall ball piece once a week. What I'm doing is like, okay, I'm doing this descending 5K row progression here. I'm doing 5 1Ks here, and I'm doing row speed work on Friday or Saturday. I'm doing that 3 days a week, and I do weeks of that, and I'll improve my rowing.
And that builds your rowing endurance.
Yeah, I'll
massively.
PR my 5K when I'm done, and I'm like, look how much better my rowing is. And then rowing shows up in use age group semifinals from 2 years ago. We did like I don't remember exactly the numbers, but it was like 2K row, 1500 row, 1K row, and there's bench press between it. And my last row was nowhere near my 5K pace because I prepared rowing, but I didn't prepare rowing in Metcon, in CrossFit, in whatever you want to call it, in sport specific capacity. And that, I think, it's a mistake I've repeatedly made. I'd make it less as a coach and more as an athlete, because I'm like, Adam, we have to get my rowing better. And he obliges. But I think I see that so commonly. Even my athletes are like, I need to run an endurance cycle. So let's do a big zone 2. And it's necessary. I'm going to borrow from my friend Evan Pycon. It's necessary, but not sufficient for improving your endurance.
Yeah. So that would be a good starting point. Maybe,
so we're making sure that when people hear this, we're not saying that the erg work or focusing on the erg work is bad. We're just saying you're missing.
It is. No, it's absolutely needed. And I think that's the important part. Necessary, right? But that can only be the foundation. That's your base, right? Like, it helps you raise the ceiling. It's the same thing we talked about with the strength work or with the skills. Like, you have to take some step back, and it can't just be crazy intensity on your strength work. Like, you got to be able to move well, or the skills. You got to have the technique to be able to do the ring muscle up. And then we build into more of the, like, I'm going to go over the rings and then press out of the dip and do all the things for muscle up. The same thing here is Kyle wanted to build a base for his rowing, but what would the next step be then for the person that needs rowing help in a Metcon? They do the 5K row progression or whatever else they do in the off season. What's next?
Next, in my perspective, is to start to integrate it into sport. And what I've done in the past, if you just rewind like 3 years ago and before, I would have done that as like intervals, right? And, we do a lot of interval work, and Pete has a lot of interval work. I know we've done as an organization with our individual athletes tons of interval work, but I don't think for athletes like me that's as beneficial, because as soon as I can rest for 30 seconds, man, I recover fast between those. And I think some of the more strength power athletes do that. So what I would think would be next would be like 5 rounds for time, 1K, this is terrible, 1K row, 30 wall ball, 20 pound, 10 feet, and just work through that at your target paces, right? Because I think in the end, for the more strength and power type athletes, that you really want to think about how much time and volume you're spending at sport specific speeds. But if you don't have the base endurance to support doing that,
you wouldn't be able to do that.
You're not even going to be close, and your sport specific speed isn't going to be there. You might be able to do that for your first 1K, but you're not going to be able to repeat it across. And that's really for this type of athlete what you need to do.
Totally. Just to give an example for the audience, what we'll do and compete this off season. So we're starting our new cycle right now, and this is kind of our limiter season, right? So we're looking at kind of like more of the common bottlenecks that people see, and a lot of those are skill bottlenecks. For example, pressing endurance, handstand push-ups always come out, and then it's a huge bottleneck for a lot of people. Or maybe it is ring muscle ups, or maybe it's just squat endurance in general. Like the wall balls really hold you back because your legs just blow up, or maybe it's thrusters that cause your legs to blow up. We'll focus on that for an 8-week period where a lot of our true endurance work is just cyclical. We're going to run that base building phase. To Kyle's point, that's the part that is necessary to get the ceiling high enough that we can actually reach that potential later on. And then in that second 8-week phase, when we're doing all the muscular endurance plus cyclical endurance, then we start blending it back together. And a couple times a week, it is interval style, where now we're going to go above that pace. So maybe okay, this is if I did 5 rounds for time, which sounds awful, 1K and 30 wall balls, my pace is going to be slower than if I did 5 sets of that. In the 5 sets, we want to go a little bit faster. We're trying to overreach a little bit. We'll rest a couple minutes.
And that has like a mental adaptation to it, right?
Absolutely.
This is something that we don't talk. Maybe we should just do a full podcast on that. I was talking to someone the other day I actually heard you talking to Greg out there. He was saying that today, Greg is one of our Masters semifinal athletes. He said he feels like he's getting fitter doing these workouts right now because he's going harder than he usually does, but it's because mentally he knows he has to. And I think that you learn to overcome maybe some of the pain that you otherwise feel. And
when you're doing the interval work, when you're doing intervals, but you're going above your pace, you got to have that tolerance build up.
Yeah, I think there's a huge nervous system or psychological component to that as well. And I think, we had, before we started the podcast, we came up with our list of, what do people miss building, when building endurance. I think that is a huge factor.
So true.
Coming from a sprint sport, I was a sprint swimmer, so I swam for 20 seconds in the 50 free and like maybe 45, 47 seconds in the 100 butterfly, 100 freestyle. Like it was super short. And so I never really built the psychological skills that are necessary to endure for 20 minutes or 30 minutes or, for 2.5 hours for a ruck challenge or anything like that. And so I've had to learn how to endure. And I think building those psychological skills is just as important. But the kind of cool thing about doing endurance training is that you learn them as you're going.
That's true.
Or you don't, and you stop doing endurance work.
You're just like, I'm done with
this stuff sucks. Like I'm just going to stick to my heavy barbells but for me, that's not where I want to be.
Right. If you want to be great at the sport. Yeah.
I don't know if you can remember where you were, but I interrupted saying that it was kind of a mental thing. So, you're talking about the intervals.
Yeah. So just to give an example, we'll have those interval days where you are going above those paces. Like if you were doing 5 rounds per time, 1K and 30 wall balls, you're not going to be able to do a 2K pace on that because you're just going to blow up. You're doing 5,000 meters of rowing. But in intervals, you would be able to get closer to that. So we're going a little bit hotter, a little bit faster. And there's a psychological component, but there's also a physiological component as well. And then there are other days where we will go long. Actually, in the next cycle, we're going to have a long burpee and row progression where you're going to do 15 to 20 minutes of burping and rowing. And part of that is because we saw that this year. Now, will we see it again next year? Who knows?
Maybe
but it's
not.
a great way to be able to build your endurance with simple movements in the offseason.
Hey, and real quick, I know we have a lot of newer people to the sport. Listen, and just explain what the interval is for if they're like, okay, I'm going to pretend I know what you mean, but I don't know what you mean.
Yeah, so an interval in an example like that, let's say you did 5 sets of something. What the interval would be is you do work for a certain amount of time, and then you're going to rest, and then you would repeat that work. And there are all different ways that you could do it. You could do 1-to-1 work to rest. So maybe the time it takes you is the time that you'll rest. Sometimes we rest way longer. If we're doing high-powered work, maybe it takes a minute to do the work, and then we rest 3, 4, 5 minutes, or 2 recovery if you really want to put a max effort. When we're doing endurance work, a lot of times it's like maybe you're doing 6 or 8 minutes of work and you're only resting 1 or 2 minutes between there. So you're not actually resting to full recovery when we're starting over again for 3 or 4 intervals.
Well, and to that
point, the key is the rest.
There's a pacing structure to that as well. So when you're trying to do those shorter rest interval components, you're really pacing more at your threshold. And I know that that's a term that gets thrown out a lot, but basically the idea would be to pace at row at a pace that's going to be sustainable across all of them. Or if it's row wall ball, like our example, 1K row, 30 wall ball, that if your first set took you 4 minutes and 30 seconds, that your second set takes you 4 minutes and 30 seconds, and your third set takes you 4 minutes and 30 seconds, and your fourth set takes 4 minutes and 30 seconds, and then you drop the hammer and you do it in 4 minutes and 20 seconds on the last one. Like that is the kind of sustainable pacing. And that's the kind of stuff that, athletes that are stronger need.
Yeah.
Honestly.
And which, by the way, is really hard to do. Like, it's always easy maybe on your second set to keep the same pace, but a lot of people miss pace, and then that third set, instead of 4:30, is 7 minutes or 6:30 because they just blow up. So learning how to pace is extremely important.
And I think the types of athletes who really need that kind of, threshold mixed modal CrossFit endurance work, the ones that are stronger, they have so much power. Like they could always go faster on the first one. And the second one, they could probably go faster. But if they do, they spill over and they can't maintain after that. And that's how if you're doing endurance intervals, that's how you've screwed up. Unless they are intended to be like, every 10 minutes you're doing like 500 meter row, 20 burpees over the erg, and it takes you 2.5 minutes and you're resting for 7.5 minutes between the intervals. Well, then it should be done real fast.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Actually, let's walk through that real quick. Give me an interval. 5 rounds of what have you been saying? Row and wall ball.
1K row, 30 wall ball.
Okay. And I'm doing 5 of those with how much rest in between?
Those would probably be done with like 2.5 minutes of rest.
Okay, we're just spitballing here, but let's say that I'm doing that and you want me to hold the same time across. I get to my third one and I've dropped off by like 30 seconds. And so I'm on my third one, there's 5 total. If I'm at that point, what did I do wrong, and how are you talking to me as your athlete?
Most likely you probably rode too fast on the first and second one, and that's what, led to that drop off on number 3. It's also possible that you went, most likely, thinking about the types of athletes that would do that, they probably went unbroken on the first set of wall ball, which was a mistake. And then the second set, they probably, they were able to go like 15-15. And the third set, they were down to 10-10-10 with like 10-second breaks between them. And that's where some of the fall off came.
Yeah. And what are you saying to me to get my head right for the next time we do something like that?
Yeah. So the coaching cue is real simple. It's like, well, hey, look, if you ended up on the third round doing 10-10-10 wall ball, we're going to start with 10-10-10 wall ball this time. But instead of taking 10 seconds rest between each one, we're going to go to 5 seconds rest between each one. And you're going to just hold that all the way across. And if you can do that, then you get to graduate to the next level, which will be 15-15 wall ball. And if you do that next time, then you get to graduate to the next level, which is unbroken. And then if you're successful there, then it's like, well, I think your row pace might need to speed up a little bit. So instead of holding 155, now we're going to hold 150, and let's see if you can hold that all the way across.
Now, on the opposite end of that spectrum, there's going to be someone who hears, hey, we want you to hold the same time on all 5. And so I just lowball it at a pace on the first one where I can easily hold it for 5 all the time. What's the problem with that athlete? What are you saying to them?
If they're an individual athlete of mine, they're going to repeat the exact workout the next week, but I'm going to give them faster target paces.
Yeah, very few people end up doing that.
That's not a common CrossFit thing.
Yeah, I think most people, they go out too hot. And so I would prefer someone to go out a little bit slower and just say, okay, we're going to redo this. And you did 157. Now you're going to do 152. And let's see if we can.
But no one goes so drastically low that you're just like,
I'm sure some people do, but it's more rare than you think.
I don't think I coach any athletes who would do that. They always would.
Would that be a waste of their time, or they're going to get something out of it? Or
so that's a big depends question, and it depends on what their goal is and what they're trying to get out of it. Like, is the intention to build base endurance? Because if it is, then maybe they're going to get something out of that. They're going to build base endurance from that. But if they're trying to get those adaptations to transfer to the sport, then no, that they're not getting anything out of that.
The last option there too, Chris, would be if you're doing this and you just kind of blow up, it may be because you haven't built any endurance base. So that's when we go back to the whole necessary but not sufficient. You still need to do some of that cyclical work. And that's why we have it in our program, especially this time of year, is like, let's build that base. And actually, Chris, you're doing this right now. Me and you are doing some progressions that we're going to have later on in the season for all our athletes, which are a lot of fun. But yeah, no, it's actually been a blast doing it and hard. But those then, let's say that you did that, we finish it in a couple of weeks, which we will, and then me and you went into a row and wall ball progression, you'd feel much better doing that now as opposed to if you just started with the row and wall ball progression.
Yeah, imagine doing you remember the row wall ball workout from the Open in
2015.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
2019, sorry.
2019.
Yeah. Tell us what it is real quick.
I think it's 19
10
calories
rounds, 10 rounds of 19 and 19.
19 calories row, 19 wall ball. Imagine that you do that workout with no specific preparation. So you just like tomorrow,
Gross.
everyone who's listening goes, and that's the workout that you have for tomorrow. Okay. That's option one. The other option is week one, we do an EMOM. On the odd minutes, you do 12 wall ball. On the even minutes, you do 12 calories row. And then on the next week, you do 14 and 14. The next week, you do 16, 16. The next week, you do 18 and 18 until you can't make the row and the wall ball within the time. As soon as you can't make it, then we test the workout the next week. How much better do you feel?
Oh, way better.
Everybody who's listening to this podcast immediately, just the light bulb went off. Like if you run specific endurance progressions for types of workouts that we see on a regular basis, you're going to do way better, and it's going to feel way better doing it too. And that's why, the psychological component of endurance adaptation comes in.
Agreed.
That, doing something that kind of grades your exposure, gets just a little bit harder and a little bit closer to the actual test each week, and then do the test, man, you feel so much better.
So, sorry, Brandon.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, so you brought up, okay, so now we're mixing things. So we're not just doing our base level stuff of just the ergs. We're mixing it with movements. A lot of times when that happens, you find out you blow up in different ways, or that you can't breathe in certain positions. And how does that affect this whole equation?
Yeah.
That's a deeper conversation, but I mean, you've done some studying on that.
Yeah, quite a bit. I think first off, if you are the people who tend to be strength and power type athletes tend to have a really rigid rib cage. I don't want to go into infrasternal angles and all that stuff. That's not
please do. Please do.
No, it's not.
Infrasternal
This is
angles.
not the podcast for that.
That's the title of the show.
Infrasternal angle.
I'm going to skip it.
Yeah. They tend to have really stiff rib cages, and it makes it so that breathing is just harder, right? You got more muscle mass. You can just think about
It's
it.
essentially like wearing a weight vest.
Yeah, you got a weight
Tightening
vest
it
just
down.
kind of strapped around you because you got, tighter pecs, tighter lats, all that stuff. So for stronger athletes, spending time opening up the rib cage, opening up the diaphragm, just doing the old Kelly Starrett, gut smash with a squish ball, doing that kind of stuff, and then just doing simple breathing work. You don't have to go out and buy fancy devices or anything like that. Just, lay down, breathe into the diaphragm, then expand the rib cage and just get as much expansion as you can, and then exhale and get as much compression as you can, and just work on opening and closing the rib cage as much as you can. It makes it so that you are reducing the energy cost of breathing, right? Every time you take a breath, it takes muscular work. Those are muscles that are contracting and relaxing for you to get a breath. And when you're doing endurance work, you're breathing at a really high rate. So with us sitting here right now, we're probably breathing at like 10 or 12, maybe 13 breaths per minute. But in the middle of a Metcon, we're likely breathing like 45 to 50 breaths per minute.
Yeah.
And so the amount of energy that our bodies are using to expand the rib cage and, drop the diaphragm and expand the lungs and bring air in and then contract all of that to get all that air back out is extremely high. There are research studies that show it's up to about 30% of the total oxygen that's used during exercise is used just for breathing.
That's insane.
And the tighter you are and the more, constricted and
the more energy you're
the
using.
more energy you
Help
use
me
to
out,
breathe.
Kyle. I'm the person that you just described, and I'm listening to this podcast.
I don't believe you.
No, okay, I'm not, but someone out there is, and they just heard you say all that, and they're like, okay, I'll go get my K-Star squishy ball. I'll do those exercises you just said. I know we're just spitballing, but give me a percentage increase on how much better I will be having done those. How much?
Good luck giving a percentage.
100% better. Instant. I know. I think
how much juice is going to be squeezed out of that?
it will be noticeable subjectively. You will notice that your breathing is freer in Metcons potentially even after just one session. If someone spent, 2 minutes using the Kelly Starrett squish ball and rolling out their abs and diaphragm just to loosen that up, and then prop their feet up on a bench, lay on their back, put their hands on their diaphragm and breathe into the diaphragm and then expand their ribs and then exhale and contract all that and do that for, do essentially like box breathing, 4 seconds in, 4 second hold, 4 second out, 4 second hold for, 3 to 5 minutes. They will have a noticeable improvement in the effort to breathe during a Metcon. Now, whether or not that's going to result in performance improvement, probably
But
not.
if you layered it in
Exactly.
with all
But
of the conditioning
if you
work,
had the whole
that
package aside from that, that would help.
and here's another thing that is just like an easy hack is get into the positions that maybe are troubling you. So like hold a barbell in the front rack in the bottom of the squat and do box breathing that way. That's a great way to warm up or cool down each day. Same thing with an overhead squat or whatever. But a lot of people with handstand walking or handstand positions, like those are easy things that you can do.
and
as
that really
warm-ups.
does help.
Dude,
Yeah.
it does. So I just finished, I did a repeat for workout 3 of semifinal, which is the front squat ring muscle up workout. And I've used to always have a problem breathing in front rack for front squats. It was like front squats were the worst because I felt like I was suffocating the entire time, but I spent time literally holding 185, 225 in front rack and just learning to, where do I breathe, right? So when you have a barbell on front rack.
How much time did you spend on that?
There were
like you went in one day in practice, or
no, it was weeks of time where anytime I was warming up for cleans or front squats, that I would spend 5 minutes where I would call it exploration because that's just what I was doing, but I was just getting into positions and breathing. And one of the things that I found is I tend to be like
intentional breathing.
Yeah, an upper chest breather. So when I inhale, right, I like raise my rib cage up, my traps shrug a little bit.
Pressing into the bar.
Imagine if I've got 225 in the front rack or 185 for this workout, and I'm literally using my breathing muscles to lift a barbell.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of stupid if you think about it because you're using all this extra muscle and doing all this extra muscular work just to inhale. So I had to learn how to breathe more. I wouldn't even call it diaphragmatically, but into the lower ribs and breathe into my posterior ribs while I was in front rack, which is hard because all those muscles are tight from, being in a front rack.
Yeah, yeah.
But by doing that, man, it was night and day. This is probably the easiest I've ever breathed in.
Yeah, you look good doing
front
it.
squat. Yeah.
I have done in the past where it's maybe 2 minutes in my warm-ups and 3 times a week. So, and you could do more, but my point is like, it can just literally be part of the warm-up, part of your cool down each day where you're getting into those positions and you get more comfortable doing that.
Yeah. I tend to pick certain things like that I want to work on. That's like, okay, anytime I'm in front rack, it's hard to breathe. So I'm going to work on that. Or, a lot of times I find that as I get more fatigued, it's hard to get my toes to the bar. So I'll do some like Jefferson curl style stretches. I have a little step in my house that's like 6 inches, and I'll get a kettlebell and I'll basically go like down below toes to bar range of motion.
The next step.
Yeah. And just do some basic stretching in that position and take some deep breaths and kind of expand those posterior ribs. And it's made my toes to bar way better to the point I was able to go unbroken on the 30 in the quarterfinal workout.
Boom.
Right.
All right. So we've talked about kind of like maybe some steps for endurance, but one of the things we haven't talked about, and we brought up all these different movements, is people sometimes think that they need to just go hard on rowing and wall balls to get better endurance, but they don't ever think about the movement quality of the wall ball or even their rowing technique. So how important is movement efficiency when we're talking about endurance?
I mean, I think it might be the most important component, especially like you gave 2 great example movements. Rowing, I think, is king. The people that are
not doing the Trevor tug are never going to win.
They're never going to win. The more efficient your row, like if you look at people that were, say, like a collegiate rower, like they might physiologically have some specific adaptations for rowing and whatnot. But if they've been doing the sport for, let's say, 5-6 years, then most of those have faded and have now become, CrossFit adaptations, and they're about as fit as the other really fit CrossFitters that are in the sport. However, when they get on the rower, they kick their ass, and there's
way more efficient.
Yes, they're just way more efficient. Technically, they are so much more efficient. Same thing for runners. Same thing for swimming, right? Travis, if we went and got our VO2 max tested, Travis's VO2 max is probably 10 milliliters per kilogram per minute higher than mine. But I'll smoke him in any swim event that we need to, not because I'm stronger or more enduring or anything like that. Simply because I'm way more efficient because I swam for 15 years, a really long time.
He's just not as efficient as you.
Exactly.
Essentially, let's say with swimming, in the water, you're using less effort per stroke than Travis is.
And probably traveling further and faster.
Right. So in the same thing, maybe in a CrossFit setting, let's just say it's a wall ball, or let's do a thruster because that's more realistic. You got heavy load. You got 115 pounds. You're doing the thrusters at the end of the age group workout. For someone that has a really clean squat position, they have a comfortable front rack where they can breathe, like you were just talking about, versus the athlete, and all our age group athletes know this, as you get a little bit older, the front rack gets a little bit harder. The person that has it off their shoulders, and now you're doing 30, they're using so much more effort per rep. And so even if maybe they have more quote unquote capacity, they're using more effort each of those reps, which means their workload is way higher than someone that has good squat positions.
That ties right back to the breathing we were talking about. If they're holding a floating front rack, right, so the bar's sitting 3 or 4 inches off their shoulders, then they're actively using muscular tension to hold the bar up. And so every time they do try and take a breath when they're in front rack, they have to lift the entire bar again, instead of just letting it rest on the shoulders and being able to, relax all that tension. So they never have a period of rest. I know that it's a weird concept to think that there's rest within a thruster, but if you get very efficient in movements, you can always find places to rest within the movement. And, thruster's a great example.
Yeah, you should make everything cyclical, right? Almost like it's like you're riding the bike.
If you have good overhead position, there's a momentary pause and rest, when you lock out the thruster at the top. And then again, if you have really good front rack position, there's a momentary rest and pause right in the front rack position. And it's not a rest in the sense that you're stopping there and taking a second. It's just that those are places where there's less muscular work being done. And that leads to better endurance because you're doing less work than other people who are in, high tension positions when they're overhead or in front rack.
Yeah. So then, because I know that there's so many athletes out there. We see it all the time with maybe poor squat. Like my squat position is not as clean as maybe yours, or someone that's like a Noah who can like get a super wide stance and short and efficient. And we're doing the same workout and I'm doing more work. I'm grinding my head, hitting it against the wall every single week, trying to build endurance. What should that athlete do? What should I do to help build the movement efficiency while I'm also still doing the other endurance work?
Well, for a lot of people like that, they have mobility limitations, right? They have a hard time just even getting into those positions unloaded. And, Max, this was probably 2017, 2018 when he said it, but he's like, if you can't get into a position, say like a empty barbell front rack or an empty barbell front squat, and that position looks good, but you can with load, like that's a problem in CrossFit. Maybe it's not a problem as a power lifter,
right.
You can have that tension, but if you need to be able to do empty barbell thrusters and do them fast and efficiently, and you need to be able to do 300-pound thruster for a 1RM, like you need to have the movement capacity to be able to do that. So doing mobility work to be able to get yourself in those positions. And that might be, a lot of people, I think, overcomplicate mobility work. They want to do these really elaborate routines, and we have some incredible routines for people that want to dig in and spend a lot of time doing mobility in the compete program. And I have a lot of my individual athletes doing those, but I also don't think that those are necessary for just claiming positions, right? You can just get an empty barbell and work on your front rack position, right? If that's one of the ones you struggle with. If you struggle with squat position, maybe get a kettlebell and sit in the bottom of a squat and just let your body, let your nervous system, we talked about psychological adaptations, let your nervous system figure out that it's okay to be down there and turn tension off. And like, you're not going to get hurt in that position, and just improve positions, I think, is as important as doing, 30 minutes of guided mobility work.
Yeah. I have just been sitting in the bottom of a squat or doing some like basic gapping for my knee to get more knee flexion. And just those two things alone have made it much easier where I don't feel like I have to have the tension on to get to the bottom of a squat with load. Because before I was doing this even a couple of months ago, I could squat fine, but it's the same thing you talked about with people with the front rack. I had to almost like create a bunch of tension in my hips and my core to get down to that position. Otherwise, like I just couldn't turn my brain off to squat all the way down below parallel.
Yeah.
And so that little bit of every single day doing 3 minutes of gapping to the knee, which is essentially putting something into the knee and then creating knee flexion, right? And sitting in the bottom of the squat has made it so much easier to air squat and front squat and do thrusters and all of those things, to where even if my endurance, the capacity, whatever you want to call it, hasn't gone up, it's easier to do a thruster workout right now than it was 3 months ago.
Yeah. I've found for myself a similar set of mobility tools that I use on a regular basis. So every night I do couch stretch, and then I do a 90-90 where I work on, the forward leg and the trail leg. So I'm getting some internal rotation, external rotation stretching, go through some switches, and then I do frog stretch. And then sometimes I'll stretch my hamstrings because I really hate stretching my hamstrings. I skip that often. Then I do like an overhead position stretch where I just put my hands up on the bed and kind of press my chest through, open up my pecs because I got big pecs that are real tight.
You cannot lie.
And I got big pecs and I cannot lie. And that's it. I'm done. It's
yeah. So essentially you have a routine built for you based on the limitations that you have that you need to work on.
When I do those on a regular basis, which I always do, man, I can just get into a squat with no warm up. And I know that
feels good,
especially for younger people that are listening to
what?
the podcast. What are you talking about? You can get it.
All the age groupers know.
I age up to 40 next year, like getting into a squat with no warm up whatsoever and not going like, ugh.
All right. Another bogus question that you probably won't be able to answer, but of the percentage of people who claim that they need endurance or they think they need it, what percentage of them are really in this bucket that you just laid out, which is that you have a movement inefficiency issue that is showing to you as an endurance problem?
40 to 50.
So it's that high.
Yeah.
I think everyone has movement inefficiencies that they can clean up. So like this is a perfect time in the off season, like maybe the season just ended for you. Let's say you just finished age group semifinals, you don't make it to the games, or you just finished quarterfinals and now you're looking at, okay, I want to do a competition in September. The first month or so, like what held you back? And it's not just a skill thing, right? Or not just a strength or endurance thing. Look at the movement patterns. And if it was something that was really hard for you, then break it down to the very basics of that movement. So if we went back to, let's just say it was a thruster, what is causing the issue? If everything's perfect in my thruster, I can get into a front rack, I can get into the bottom of a squat, and there's no extra tension there, then I can move on. But if you're the athlete that, the front rack is a little tight, it actually causes some elbow pain or wrist pain, or it's really hard for me to get below parallel, then you as an athlete should start working on that movement limitation first, and that will clear everything out for you so that you can build endurance as you go into your competition.
I look at it from a little bit of a different perspective. So we host camps every year, right? We host this community camp, and we host, our competition prep camp. And whenever we do, we get to see a kind of sample of athletes that are definitely higher performing athletes, but they're also people that are in the mid quarter levels. They're probably in the thousands to 5,000 level. Plenty of them that come in, and without a doubt, the ones that are in my group all can improve their movement quality across the board. Every single one of them, and the only people that maybe that's not the most important thing for them to do are the ones that have individual coaches who really are. The pro athletes, they train like pro athletes. But I've seen so many, done those camps for years now, and every time, like, movement quality and changing movements to be more efficient is the number one thing that they all need to work on. It's like what we do breakout groups after every time we do a workout, and I'll get video and bring them back and be like, look, we can change your toes to bar. If you make these adjustments, it's going to be more efficient. We can change your box jump technique, simple things like box jump technique. We can make these adjustments and it's going to be more efficient. We can change your squat pattern. You need to do these 2 stretches because, this is where you're most limited. But I see that almost across the board, that almost every athlete that we bring in that isn't individually coached does need some movement help across the board.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, did you have a follow-up to that? Because there's one other thing I want to talk about.
Say that, and then I got another.
Okay. Well, the last thing, since we're talking about movement efficiency with endurance, is really, I use kind of 2 terms for it. I don't know what's best, but skill resiliency, the ability to maintain your skills under high levels of fatigue, or just skill endurance, right? And what I mean by that is, for those that did quarterfinals this year, workout 3, you do the handstand push-up, toe to bar, handstand push-up, and rope climb. You do the handstand push-ups, and you get to ring muscle-ups. And everyone got there, and it just like people with really pretty muscle-ups, they just went out the window, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's going to happen. Like, you're not going to be able to keep perfect technique when you're under high amounts or high levels of fatigue. But those that can keep decent technique when they're really, really tired and really, really messed up in workouts usually do better. So it kind of is still the same thing as movement efficiency, but in particular with those high level skills, practicing the things like ring muscle ups or handstand walking or pirouettes, if those come out of the semifinal, being able to do those when you're breathing really hard is extremely important.
Yeah, that's kind of, touching back to what we talked about, training the grip for the box step ups, under this, in the same metabolic and heart rate type environment that you're going to see it in competition. If you only train your muscle ups before, you do, I do 5 on the minute for, 6 minutes. So I get my 30 reps in, and then you've got to do the quarterfinals workout where you got to do 20 when you can barely hold on to the rings because you've done 10 rope climbs. Like, you're just not going to be very good at it. Like, you have to take those movements and put them in the sport. You have to, or else, or not even the sport, but you have to do it, like, do some hard rowing, and not just, threshold rowing. Do some hard rowing to the point that you can barely hold on to the rowing handle, and then go do muscle ups and feel what that feels like, and build the psychological adaptations to have the confidence that I can jump up, grab on.
Huge.
And like Mia said in the skills episode that we referenced, that there's a point where if you are just kind of gifted with these skills and you always had them, you might not know all the steps that someone who maybe didn't had to learn. And that if you go learn those, as your ability starts to break down during a workout like you're talking about, you'll know when you hit that point, like, oh, here's where I'm messing up. And those people tend to still do better once they're tired.
Yeah, that's why the basics, even for a pro athlete, are so important in the off season. Then the basics.
I don't think a lot of people realize that a lot of these pro athletes go back and do these basics like a lot.
Yeah, well, in particular within our brand, they do, right? Like, I mean, that the reason why is because, and we've said
were you flexing there?
Well, with us, I was just thinking about how much I neglect the basics.
It's hard. Why? Because you already have all those skills.
As a master's athlete who's done this for a really long time and has a limited time to train, the first thing that goes are
you're not a
the
pro
drills
athlete, though. I was talking about
no, but at one point I was one of those and I did all of that stuff. And at this point I'm just like kind of hanging on to my bank of skill. And I think if a lot of people would have, I'm thinking about masters athletes now, but a lot of people that are, aging into the 40 to 44 and 45 to 49, they've been doing this for 10, 12 years potentially now. Had they spent more time developing those skills, they might be competing at a higher level.
Yeah. Healthier for longer too. Just to go back to kind of tie a bow on that, every other sport, and I've said this before, but I think it's good to reiterate, they are doing the basics even at the highest level in the off season. So in golf, all the best golfers are practicing just one piece of their takeaway to make sure that the club's in the right position. In swimming, they're practicing exactly how they're setting up and all their strokes. I mean, I looked through just today the compiled resource that we have for all the swimming stuff and all the different, you break down the stroke, every single piece of it. And that's what the best in the world are doing.
They do that every day.
Every day. In running, Usain Bolt, the fastest man in the world, was doing A skips and B skips and position work.
Every day.
Every single day. But for some reason in CrossFit, I think that once we get past that we can do a muscle up, we just kind of neglect all the swings and the process of coming over the rings and all those. And some of that we have to because there's so many things that are testing the sport. But I would encourage people in an endurance podcast that it's not just about going hard, it's also getting all those little details fixed so that you can go hard.
Hell, even in music, have you ever watched like the Metallica documentaries or whatever, and their guitarist is sitting there doing the most basic shit to warm up before they go on stage? Or Ozzy and his documentary, it's like he's doing like simple vocal drills before he goes out there and
that's actually, I don't follow that, but that is so cool that they do that.
Yeah. So my question I was going to ask is, like we said earlier, we had those 3 different buckets: strength, skills, and now endurance. And so if you didn't have the requisite strength, you're going to do that. If you didn't have the requisite skills, you got to do that. What about a third person who might say they got strength and they got skills? Is there a point where endurance is like, you've checked the box, I've got enough? Or is it just like you always keep adding to it? Is there like a point where you're like, I'm good and now I could move on to, or
I coach a couple of them.
Ellie, yeah.
Brooks.
But they would be working on their strength.
They just have to work on strength.
Right. And there are some of those people that are very, very enduring, but they need to work on strength. Is there, I think your question is there someone that has all 3?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Is there a point where
you do that, you win the CrossFit games?
You're Matt Fraser.
Alexis is probably the closest that we have in the brand to that. And you watch her go run or you watch her do any of this stuff, and it's like, my God. When she did the quarterfinals workout, the one we've been referencing with the muscle ups at the end, she was just flying through, and it wasn't even an endurance workout for in the same way that it was for everybody else. It was just like she just did her thing and done. That
it goes back to the point of like she's super efficient. So like muscle ups didn't break down for her. Her resiliency of the skill was so much higher than everyone but maybe 3 or 4 other girls in the world. That's why she can do that and go that fast. But I don't think there are many of those. Those are like the best of the best in the game.
So those people aren't even listening anyway. All right, I got a different question. How do you organize endurance throughout a season? So you have off season, then you ramp back up for whatever. Explain how you view endurance through the season.
Well, this one is actually much more challenging now because people are not just following the CrossFit season. So, and I love it. I love that people are doing local competitions or other big, Wadapalooza comes out in the fall. And so they aren't thinking about peaking just for the open. They're thinking about, I need to be ready in October for the qualifier. Or I just had someone message me this morning, hey, I have a competition in 12 weeks. How should I look at that? So all of these, I guess we can answer the question about the broader season, but I think that now in the sport, it's almost like you're always working toward improving all these things at once.
Yeah, you could have, just a few years ago when people were just obsessed with the CrossFit season and that was like the whole thing, you could use a very block periodization, right? Where it'd be like, you're going to do 6 weeks of base or 12 weeks of base work. And then we're going to do 12 weeks of interval work to transition that base work. And then we're going to do, 12 weeks of, just very sport specific work. And now we're going to, do a compete phase and now you're ready to go compete. But that's not the case anymore. And I
there's
actually
still a lot of people who do that though.
I would gravitate. I would steer people away from that as strongly
Why?
as I can, because I don't think that block periodization. Look, you build this base for 12 weeks, and then you're not going to do any more base work, and you're going to just move to intervals. Like you're not going to retain that base work for long enough to get into your season. So I think using shorter blocks or even not doing blocks, and kind of like what compete does, where it's like, there's always a little bit of everything. You're adjusting to use
dials.
Max's old analogy. Like you're turning up the endurance, the base endurance dial, and you're turning down the interval and sport dial, but you're not turning them off, right? They're just moving those down on the equalizer a little bit. And then as you get a little bit closer to your season or your competition, then you start to move up the interval one and move down the base one, and maybe tap that the competition style or sport specific style up just a little bit. Then as you get way closer, then it's like sport specific goes up to the max, intervals comes down to, medium, and base endurance work. It's still there, but it's down at a minimum. And I think using that structure is better, where it's not like it's all this, then it's all this, then it's all that, right? Versus we're going to do a little bit of everything all the time. You need more endurance work, so we're going to prioritize more of the base endurance work early, but you're still going to touch on intervals. You're still going to touch on sport specific. I have found that to work much better.
With an individual coach, that's easy. So like Kyle's writing for somebody, and he can do that and manipulate for the athlete. In a group program, the way that athletes get better, one, you just have to have a solid group program, which we have, but there have to be options in there for the athlete then to choose what they need to ramp up and down. So we have our base program, which is just always well-rounded.
That's what I'm going to be doing if everything goes well and I qualify, which everyone will know that by the time the podcast comes out.
Exactly. It's soon.
What if I put it out tonight?
Okay, good point.
Before
9:30 or after?
Yeah. I don't even remember what I was saying. Oh, the base program, you would follow that. You kind of well-rounded. But let's say that I'm the skill-limited athlete. I turn those dials up by doing a skill program. Or if I'm the endurance-limited athlete, I turn that dial up by following our endurance program. Or I'm the strength-limited athlete, I dial that up by doing the strength bias program. So there are just these options that you have to figure out as an athlete. But in a group program like ours, our coaches are in there to help you with it.
I was going to say, I know I would be like, what the hell? I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah, but that's why we're doing these podcasts, so people can kind of figure out. And then exactly right. They come and they ask us, and that's the reason we put so many options in there, is because we know everyone is at a different time in their season, where some people are going to be prepping for the games, some people are going to be prepping for a local competition, and some people, it truly is their off season, so they do want to dial it back. We forced everyone after quarterfinals to dial it back for a couple of weeks that didn't make semifinals, and people hate it. But it's like, look, we are doing this. We're going to stick to our guns as a brand because we know it's going to be better off for you in the long term. And everyone that follows it, I mean, again, 100 semifinal athletes this year, and all the success that we've had is because we're keeping people healthier for longer and giving them good protocols throughout the season.
Did we really have 100 between age group and individual?
Yep.
Insane.
It's awesome.
That's awesome.
Yeah. That was it.
Yeah,
That's all.
I was out of questions.
I'm out of questions too.
Good stuff, boys.
All right. Well,
thanks, Chris.
Thanks, y'all.
See you guys. Kind of a weak sauce ending.
Hold on, let's end it again. Let's do something else. Ask a question. Ask a good question. Ready, set.
You want to come see Lord of the Rings with me and Kyle on June 8th, 9th, and 10th?
Everyone's invited.
Yeah.
That was a sick ending.
All right. Bye.
See ya.